Good morning. I'm Shauna Stefanchik, and this is Val Montgomery, and we're here from Step Up on Series 3 of our Teacher Clarity. And today we're going to be talking about empowering student-centered learning. So empowering student-centered learning, the two major goals we're going to be talking about today is really reviewing the learning cycle and the learning pit, because these are two areas that when we're engaging students in empowered learning, that they need to understand the learning process in general, because that clarity will be helpful to them. And we also are going to explore ways that we can communicate clarity of the standards to students. So what are the barriers to student clarity? I left it blank because I thought we'd have some people on the call. But Val, maybe you and I can chat. What do we think are some barriers to our students having clarity?
Well, I would say a big one is, do students know what they are expected to be doing or what they're expected to know?
Yep. So this could be as basic as even having our I can statements written on the board. Does our student even know what this lesson is about? And then the bigger picture, if they do understand we're working on text features, do they understand metacognitively those things that they need to know in order to understand text features, right? So it can go as basic of a broader goal that we want them to learn. I mean, how many times have we walked into a classroom? I remember during observations, and I asked this one little kid, hey, why are you working on this assignment? And he looked at me and said, oh, my teacher's really into this right now. And that's an overgeneralization, but sadly, a lot of times our kids think as teachers, we're just into a certain something, and that's why we're doing the activity. We're not always as cognizant to make sure they're aware why we're doing the activity we are. So just anchoring them to the bigger picture. But then today, it's really, we're going to dive into, you're going to hear me use the word success criteria, and that goes with metacognitive skills. Do they really understand the learning progression themselves of what they're supposed to be learning on? So barriers could be time. I think a barrier could be teacher clarity.
It could also be prior knowledge, and is there a deficit in skill that the student may not even know? Whatever the teacher's into right now, they may have no clue what we're talking about.
Right. So they don't even know where they're. So to me, it comes back to that metacognition. Where am I on that learning progression? Because I may not even be able to comprehend what you're trying to work with me on right now. So I want to anchor us back to, in this barometer of learning, I think is what it's called by Hattie. Why are we even talking about clarity, and bringing it back to research? Our company in general is about this idea of collective efficacy, which has the biggest effect size. But look up here with big effect size in the blue, we've got teacher clarity. So clarity is just a big effect size, and you're going to hear a lot from our state. I was at Powerful Learning. I heard about things at our recent Elementary Principals Conference about student clarity, and we called this series Teacher Clarity because we believe teacher clarity precedes student clarity. But we have research to support it through Hattie's work. And once teachers have clarity over their standards, like we talked about in our last two sessions, then we're really able to focus on student clarity. So wow, this looks great. I gave her an ugly timeline and asked her to make it pretty, and here it is. So to review what we've done in the past is we have to have a clear system of pacing those priority standards, right? These, when we talk about competency-based learning, these priority standards are going to be turning into our competencies. So these are the big rocks that we need to make sure teachers are competent on. Then how our company has helped you is we've got these proficiency scales, which again, you could create if you have the time and capacity, but we need to have a clear idea of anchored into the Missouri standard of what those proficiency are. Once we know, we're going to backward design, and now we're our assessments, and now we're ready to help kids focus on and develop agency in their own learning. So, oh gosh, I have an extra box on here. Ignore the extra box too. So this is Eric Twaddell. He is part of Marzano Research, one of their consultant, and he did this great activity once to summarize the 4 steps that your brain goes through in learning. So I love doing this with teachers, getting groups, and let's try to guess, what do we think the 4 stages of learning are? So, you could pause this video and think through. Since we don't have a lot of people on the call, I'm going to skip to what those 4 stages are. They are prior knowledge, experience, cognitive dissonance, and then reasoning and make sense. And I love this because and he said this when I attended his session, we spend a lot of time in 1 and 2. We build prior knowledge and we help kids experience, right? We put them in activities. But where the rubber hits the road of real learning is in this cognitive dissonance, where we create an experience for kids or learners, right? I realized this worked really well as a principal. I was calling them aha moments, but what they were are moments of cognitive dissonance where I realized, wow, I once thought this, and now because I'm exposed to this new idea, I now might think something else. So they have to wrestle with that. We're going to look at another model of this, which you heard me talk about, the learning pit. There is a struggle and a pit that we have to go in when we have dissonance. And this sometimes takes a while because I thought something in the world worked this way. And now you're trying to teach me that it might work a different way. And once the student can work through this dissonance, then they can get to step 4 to reason and make sense of that information. And what Mr. Twaddell was saying is, as educators, when we spend most of our time in this 1 and 2, we build up their knowledge, we help them experience it, and we move on. We're not really getting to this deeper learning because this takes time for our kids to have dissonance. So fascinating. When we talk about student engagement, Marzano also, I should probably do a call over this, has a diamond lesson plan that he does for this very thing to help kids and focus our lessons in this area of collaborative and cognitive dissonance. So that's one theory of stages of learning. Now there is another one, James Nottingham. I meant to put a cover of his book up here. You could go to his website. He's got a book. It's all of his work is called The Learning Pit. So helping kids understand, okay, here's this new learning. The challenge is accepted. Oh my gosh, this is harder than I thought. I don't get it, right? I'm in the pit of dissonance. This is hard, but wait a second, I'm starting to get it. I've got to climb out of that pit. Aha. And to me, this would be the step 4 in Twaddell's model of now I can reason and make sense. And this work has become famous when we talk about student agency. This is a great visual representation for students to help realize learning is hard. And there's going to be a time where you just don't get it. And let's talk about NAEP scores and studies they've done on kids in our state, where they realize that kids from kids from other country, they would watch on the NAEP and they were timing them. Our kids would spend about 30 seconds on something, and if they didn't know it, they would give up and move on, where kids from other countries would stick with it 2 to 5 minutes to try to figure it out. And I think that's all very much tied to this mindset, which is why mindset became so possible, right? It's the same thing of growth, not fixed. You're not just born smart. You're not just born with that knowledge. That we're helping students be cognizant of. Learning is a process, and there is this pit where sometimes it's going to be really hard and you just won't get it. And so grit and stamina, all the things that we're talking about, to me, connect to this model, and we're being transparent with kids that this is normal and that this is expected. Val, any thoughts about learning pit?
I am just thinking about my own son and how this applies to him, and we're working on this. We're working on having that grit to get through it. And it's interesting to watch, like the next day, for instance, we're working on sight words. And so like the next day, it's a whole different mentality that he comes to it with. So yeah, that's a connection making.
Yeah. And I mean, yes, we both have kindergartners. So, and yours is a perfectionist, right? And those are the hardest ones because we want to just get it. And I think that is a majority of our kids. They think we're either smart or we're not. And so the whole part of empowering students is to help them understand that there is this cycle that our brain goes through and that it is okay to be stuck in the pit. And how much easier is it when a kid can communicate, I'm in the pit right now, but I know I'm going to get out of it and it's normal. And we're creating a new normal for learning. So how do we get student clarity? Again, it comes back to, we've got to have those prioritized standards. As a teacher, we have to have clarity so we can help bring it to them and lead them out of the pit. So this is just revising. Once you know as a teacher what standards you're working on and what unit, and you're clear on that, then you can decide which standard you're working on to help create this idea of criteria for kids. So once they know how learning looks in general, now we have to break it out for them. If we're working on this particular standard or skill, what are the success criteria? How do you know if you're successful as a student? So here's an example of a standard. Step one, once you have a standard, is as a teacher, you have to understand the learning progression, right? We can't pass that on to a kid until we know it. So I threw up an example of one of our learning progressions. If we had a third grade skill of drawing conclusions and supporting with textual evidence, we could see, okay, students also need to know how a text illustrations contribute to its meaning. That understanding as a teacher might help you communicate it with kids. So if you can't draw a conclusion, you have to back up and understand, how can pictures help us figure that out? We could back up to second grade. You might need to look at certain informations and facts or text features to help you understand that. You might need to know how to ask questions about a text. So again, before we can help a student go along this progression as teachers, we need to know what the learning progression and how our standards even build to help communicate that to students. Then as a teacher, you also need to unwrap. So that particular standard, what is it asking? We're drawing conclusions from explicit. In third grade, it's explicit. So that means right there information. We want kids to be able to look or read something and be able to draw a conclusion. And then we want them to be able to support it. So again, being clarified in your mind of what I need as a teacher. And then you're going to determine learning targets from it. So I want my student to know and understand how to make inferences. I want them to identify evidence. I want them to be able to make connections. Does this make sense? Like we're unwrapping it then even further. What are those specific learning targets I want? So steps 1 through 3, sorry, teachers, it's all you, right? Before we communicate it to students, we have to understand the progressions ourselves. We have these targets and success criteria in mind, and then we can clarify with students. I just turned it into I can language, right? Which we do a lot in our work. I can understand how to make inferences. I can identify. We're creating those success criteria. Now, here is, once as a teacher, you identify it. I saw a speaker at the elementary principal conference, and I'm going to give him a shout out. A wonderful principal at Liberty, Chris Gabriel, was doing a session, and I know he's been traveling all over the state with a collective collaborative. But he was talking about how once his teachers identify the success criteria, they then get an anchor chart and come up with it with the kids. All right. So there's this idea, we know that there's power in learning when kids are involved in creating it with us. However, I would say their teachers still did the pre-work of knowing what that success criteria was. And they worked with kids to say, hey, we're working on this standard. What are the things that we would need to know to be successful? Let's make a checklist. So they very much made on good old sticky paper, anchor chart paper, a checkbox, and kids came up with, well, here are the 4 things that we would need to know. And the teacher, having done that ahead of time, could help guide that conversation to make sure the kids got all those success criteria. But how powerful, because part of the empowering learning is guiding the students into those prerequisite skills that they would need to know. So really, you know, our company offers this idea of a proficiency scale that, hey, I need to be able to do these through these two things, but my success criteria along the way would be the bullets under the two. So again, this is helping your student understand that continuum of, okay, if I'm not to a 3 yet, I'm going to start here. Can I use pictures and text features to help me understand a text? A student couldn't understand if they could do that or not, right? They're understanding where they are on this continuum. I've also seen some people turn these into a graphic for students, and they use dots to put where they think they are on that learning continuum for that specific standard. But again, it's taking things we've learned from our Teacher Clarity series, putting it in I-CAN language. The teacher's still doing the front-loaded work, but they're working with the student to understand that success criteria, which in competency-based and personalized learning, this would be how we're helping support students in using a proficiency scale for their own learning. Anchoring back, you know, our tools could very much help teachers with that success criteria. And even on our digital versions for our members who are watching, remember, you have teacher tools, student tools, and vertical progressions at your fingertips. So if you're watching this and you're ready to embark, your teachers are already clear, our clients, just open up those student tools. And our suggestion to you would be now invite, rather than just putting that student scale in front of them, model with your teachers and think through, how do we invite students in to help us recreate that in a student-friendly way? That's collaborative. And the other takeaway I'll have here, and Chris Gabriel showed that because his building is deeply engaged in this work, is you can't do every priority standard at every time. It's going to be too overwhelming. So each quarter or two, choosing 1 or 2 that you're really going to engage. Maybe it's 1 ELA and 1 math that you're really having students progress, because you can't do every single one. So in conclusion, teacher clarity before student clarity. As teacher learning precedes student learning, teacher clarity precedes student learning. Success criteria is critical. So I would liken success criteria to also those prerequisite and exemplar examples of what does proficiency look like. But the end conclusion with including students is that empowering learning is powerful. So helping students understand the learning progression and then being explicit along the way with the cognitive skills they need is very powerful. And it takes a while, but this is the foundational understanding of where competency-based learning is going and what personalized learning would look like. These are the skills that your learners would need to have for us to get there. So that's all I have today. Thank you. We didn't have it. Oh gosh, and the dog is going crazy. Queuing time to end. It's a crazy Friday, but hopefully you're watching this video and it gave you some good nuggets. Thanks.